Hi again, Azure Learner. My name is Sarah Alali and I'm Microsoft Technical Trainer, and I'm here today to continue with you all the tools that you could use to deploy resources in Azure. So in part one of this video, we already talked about CLI, we talked about PowerShell, we talked about the Cloud Shell, and in this video, we'll be focusing on how to deploy using template and going with infrastructure as a code using ARM template and also using Bicep. Now let's start with Azure Resource Manager template. If you didn't watch part one, I advise you to go back and watch part one and understand the Azure Resource Manager infrastructure to fully understand what I'm going to say next about the Azure Resource Manager templates. With the move to the clouds, many teams have adopted agile development methods. These teams iterate quickly. They need to repeatedly deploy their solution to the cloud and know their infrastructure is in a reliable state. To meet this challenge, you can automate deployment and use the practice of infrastructure as a code. To implement infrastructure as a code for Azure solution, we use Azure Resource Manager template. The template is a JSON file or JavaScript object notation file that defines the infrastructure and configuration of your project. The template uses declarative syntax, which lets you state what you intend to deploy without having to write the sentence of programming command to create it. In the template, you specify the resources to deploy and the properties of those resources, and then you deploy it with using only one file and one command line. If this is your first time with ARM template and you are a little bit lost with all what I said, let me show you the easiest way to start learning about ARM template. You have just to go to your subscription, go to any of your resource group, choose resources like, for example, this VM, this IP address, this network security group, and then you could easily go to this menu that exists everywhere in Azure. Once you go to the export template, you will have an ARM template related to these resources that you choose. It just generating the template. Once the template is generated, you could start looking around, reading about what you have just have selected as resources. So here we have information about the ARM template. We could also check for the resources that are deployed. So we have network security group. We have also the VM. So all what I choose as resources. I could also visualize the template if I want to. So I could grab this link to visualize the template. So I could see what is existing in this resource group. So you could see that I have a VM that has a network card connected to an NSG, and I have also that network card connected to this virtual network, and I could see that I have DNS and other services in this resource group. I could redeploy. I could download this template if I want to reuse it, to change it, to export it, and then redeploy it in another environment. So we could just download it. So we have a zip file that will going to contain my template that I could use it later on. This is the first step that you could go through this ARM template. So if this is the first time, so you could just take a look around in this section and you will understand a little bit related to ARM template. Once you feel more comfortable with this ARM template, you could now take a look into the quick start. So the quick start is going to provide you with a database where you could grab a template and then you could deploy it directly to your subscription, or you could just download it, modify it, you could visualize it and reuse it. So you could search for a template by product or by programming language, or you could just search here related to your service, for example, an app service. I'm looking for an app service. So I do my search and I found different template related to app service that you could grab, reuse. Let's take the first one, for example. I could just click on this button and deploy it directly to my infrastructure in my subscription, or I could also visualize it and see it with a graphical representation of this infrastructure, of this template, and also look into the template, read it, and then copy it and modify it if I want to reuse this template if I like it. But if you are more interested about creating your ARM template from zero and you really need the tools and environment for that, you could use Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio for that. The only thing that you need to install a tool or the Azure Resource Manager tools, which are going to be an extension that you are going to add it to your Visual Studio. So just to hit the install button, going to provide you here to the extension to install it. You just install it and you could start using it from that. Once you do so, you could just create a JSON file. So you could create your JSON file, from file, create your JSON file in Visual Studio Code and start writing your ARM template. So you could, with this extension, just write ARM and it's going to provide you with a template to fill the information to fill the right information to fill for your template. So you have some standard properties and you have some mandatory properties that you are going to put in your ARM template. From the important or mandatory properties, we have the schema. It's really important for tools like Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio to indicate the schema to them, so they will understand the schema that you are currently using in this template. And then we have also the content version. It's not a mandatory, you could remove it, but it will be useful if you put different version of your template, so you will have a view of which version you are currently using. Also, we have the resource section where you add all your resources. So for example, I'm going to add my storage. So I'm going to write storage and going to also with related to my storage easily all the needed information to create my storage, from the name, the type, the version, tags, location, etc. I could also add parameters if I want the users to define some parameters, for example, the name. So if I want the users during the creation to define the name when I'm going to deploy the resource, so I could add a name as a parameter. It's not mandatory to add parameter, it's optional. So you could keep it without any information related to parameter. But if you really want to provide more flexibility during the deployment to add information like the name, like for example the SKU or the kind of the service that you want to use, so it's preferably to add it as parameter. Also, we have the output section. So if you want to return some properties or some information after the deployment, so you could add the output. Also, we have the variable if you want to calculate something dynamically, so you could use the variable section. We have also the function section, and it's for using any expression. So if you are using an expression a lot, so you could define this expression in here, and then you will be using it inside, for example, declaration of the creation of your resources. If you get a little bit lost with all this information that was suggested by the Azure Resource Manager template extension in Visual Studio Code, you could go back to the documentation. Here we have reference by service. So you look for your service that you are using. Currently, we are using a storage account. So I'm going to look for my storage account. And in the ARM template, because I'm using ARM template, you will get the resource format, and also you will get for your storage account all the types that will be used, description related, and the value that is supported by each properties and information that you are going to provide in your template. So here you could have all the information that you will be needing when you create your template. That's how to create Azure Resource Manager template. Azure Resource Manager templates has many advantages. Starting from declarative syntax, ARM templates allow you to create and deploy an entire Azure infrastructure declaratively. For example, you can deploy not only virtual machines, but also the network infrastructure, storage system, and any other resources you may need. You could also have repeatable result. Repeatedly deploy your infrastructure through the development lifecycle and have confidence your resources are deployed in a consistent manner. Moreover, the orchestration, you don't have to worry about the complexity of ordering operation. Resource Manager orchestrates the deployment of interdependent resources, so they are created in the correct order. When possible, Resource Manager deploys resources in parallel, so your deployment finish faster than serial deployment. You deploy the template through one command rather than having many commands, as we have seen in the previous video with CLI and PowerShell. Also modular files, so you can break your template into smaller reusable components and link them together. At deployment time, you can also nest one template inside another template if you want to. Also, CI/CD integration, which is really great. You can integrate template into your continuous integration and continuous deployment tools, which can automate your release pipelines for fast and reliable application and infrastructure updates. So by using Azure DevOps and Resource Manager template task, you can use Azure pipelines to continually build and deploy ARM template project. Also, exportable code. So you can get a template for an existing resources group by either exporting the current state to the resource group or viewing the template used for a particular deployment. Moreover, authoring tools, so you can author templates with Visual Studio Code and the template tool extension, so you get intelligence, syntax, highlighting, inline help, and many other language functions. This is some of the advantages of Azure Resource Manager template. There is much more that you could read about it in the documentation. Now let's talk about Bicep. Bicep is a domain-specific language that uses declarative syntax to deploy Azure resources. In a Bicep file, you define the infrastructure you want to deploy to Azure, and then use that file through the development lifecycle to repeatedly deploy your infrastructure. Your resources are deployed in a consistent manner. It has the same advantages of ARM template related to repeatable result, orchestration, modularity, integration with Azure services, but moreover, it has much more simple syntax. Now let's have a look how we could possibly create and use this Bicep in our environment. Let's take a look into the documentation. First of all, we need to install the Bicep tools. we need to make sure that the environment is set up for working with our Bicep file. We have different options, from using extension in Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio to deploy directly a Bicep file using Azure CLI, PowerShell, the way we're supposed to use it also with ARM template. Let's assume that we are going to install an extension in Visual Studio Code. Now you need just to visit this link in Install It to download it. So I'm using a Windows, I'm going to download it to use it in a Windows. Or it's also available in Linux, Mac, so you could use it in other operating systems. Once you download it, you could install it in your Visual Studio Code and start using it. Once it's installed in our Visual Studio Code, I should just create a file, for example, my file.bicep, and then once I create this file in my environment, I could put inside it all the template that I want to deploy. Let's assume that we are going to deploy an app service plan with an app service. So I have just to write app, and it's going to provide me all the services that has an app inside the name, and also it will provide me with code snippets for me to use it directly. So first of all, we have an app plan, and this is the code snippets for it. The second will be my web app. So I'm going just to bring my web app, and this is the code snippet to use. I could start changing the parameters. For example, I'm going to provide a fixed name for my app service plans. I'm going to provide it app service plan 345, for example. And then I could also bring names, for example, the web app name from a parameter. So just to write param for parameter, and this is name, and it's going to be a string. Once I add it, I could now change the name of the web app into name that I'm using it as a parameter. Also, I could fix the size of parameter using the max and minimum length. So just to put at minimum length, going for example to be 1, and also max length is going to be 58. Once I configured my parameter, I could also create a dependency. So when you deploy an app, a web app, so where it's not going to be deployed at only if it has the app service plan was deployed. So I just put here depends on, and then I bring my app service plan. So it's going to be depends on my app service plan. Sure, I need also to configure here that I'm going to use the app service plan. So I'm going to configure other things, the location, etc. So this is for just a demo. So I'm going to make it just a quick explanation of the ARM template. Once I do so, after finishing all the configuration, I have this amazing tool here that's going to visualize your infrastructure, especially when you have really large and big infrastructure. So it's going to be really interesting to have this visualization of your the relation between all services and dependency between all the services. So we have here see that web application is dependent on the app service plan deployment, which we have just created. So that's it. That's it. So then we just grab this template, and then we're going to deploy it in our infrastructure, in our portal, or using CLI or PowerShell, depends what we want to do. So once we do it, we could start deploying it using our tools. That's it from my side related to Bicep and ARM template. Thank you for watching this video. Watch part 1 if you want to have more information about CLI, PowerShell, the Azure Resource Manager architecture, and also the Cloud Shell. Please make sure to like the video, to subscribe to our channel, and also to leave a comment. You could connect with me if you want on LinkedIn. My name is Sarah Alali, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye.